lovely and darling viewers, it's Jen here at Check Her Joy. Today I am reviewing War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi, and I listened to the audiobook for this, which was read by Adepero Uduye. I'm sure I mispronounced both of those names. I am so sorry. I will probably put them here. If not, they are definitely down in the description below, and I am sorry. So this is a young adult science fiction dystopian Afrofuturist, maybe, novel. It centers on two sisters, Onyii and Ify, who are growing up in Nigeria during the civil war between the Nigerians and the Biafrans. It takes place in 2172. Had to write that down because honestly it's not mentioned very often. It's kind of far enough into the future that we've evolved technology that's way better. There are fully functioning robots and nanobots and definitely some really cool mechanical ships and suits, and prosthetics have gotten way better. Our main character Onyii has a prosthetic arm because she lost one of them during the war. So technology has definitely advanced a lot. There are space colonies. That's the kind of future we're looking at. But we're also looking at all of this through the lens of war. I mean, war plays a huge part in this book. It gets pretty violent. It can get a little bit graphic at times. And it definitely digs into the consequences of war and what it does to these girls and the society around them. And we get to see it at different stages. Just everything that could happen. So war was a very huge prevalent theme in this book. So just heads up on that. The main conflict in here is between, it's a civil war happening within the country of Nigeria between the main Nigerian government, which was settled by, which basically was taken over by white colonists, and it's been kind of reclaimed by the native Africans who still identify as being Nigerian, but the entire government system is definitely set up from this Western colonized outlook, as opposed to the Biafrans, who are one of the tribes that live within Nigeria. So at one point, Nigeria was just a country that was just several African tribes, and the Biafrans want more autonomy. They want to have their own say. They want their own culture more, and that's one of the things that they are fighting about. They also, a lot of the minerals that the outside world wants are in Biafran territory, and but the money from those sales are going to the main Nigerian government and not really benefiting the people in that area. So they're fighting to have control over their own land and the wealth that is in their land and literally under their houses. It is actually based off a real civil war that happened in Nigeria during the 1960s, and kind of just taking those same conflicts and putting it into the future, where we're looking at the consequences of nuclear war and climate change also. So the book is told from dual perspectives from Onyii, the older sister, and Ify. Onyii is definitely more about fighting and protecting. She is more involved in the war, and Ify is more about technology and looking towards the future, and she's also caught up in the war, but I don't know that Ify has the same. She's definitely also caught up in the war and also wants to protect those she loves and who are around her, but Ify doesn't have the same drive to go out and fight the same way. She does it when she has to, when she's backed into that corner, whereas Onyii is more of takes the lead and takes chances. She's actually gained the nickname the Demon of Biafra for her fighting skills and the chaos that she causes. So two different takes on these sisters. When we first meet them, they are in a war camp where we have several girls who are not actively fighting in the war and are trying to hide out. So they've got this camp that is trying to stay off the grid, and it's just them going to school and trying to just live their lives in the midst of all this happening around them. But they also know that the war is happening around them, and so they are trained to fight and defend themselves, and that's where we meet them. One day, their camp is discovered and they are attacked by the Nigerians, and this sets off events where the two sisters get separated and end up on different sides of the war. So this book tries to really look at war and what it means and how it impacts society, but also individual people, and especially child soldiers, and seeing it through these female lenses, where a lot of the leaders on both sides of the war are guys. The leader of the Biafran army is this very macho guy who looks to these males and like is actively recruiting young male child soldiers. And we also look at the Nigerian side, and it's also very regimented and very looking very male-centric. And the characters we're following, though, are females, and they also fit into the fighting in the war, but they have a little bit of a different take than the guys and how they fit into the whole social structure, like, and how they fight into the whole structure of the military, the fighting, I guess. I am not someone who enjoys war and fighting, in case you can't tell from this review. So this was like such a huge part of this book, and it's not really my thing. So it was, I guess, good to look at it and see something that I normally don't explore often. So that's definitely part of this book. But what was more interesting to me was these two sisters and their different looks on life and how they approach problems. Ify is very technologically minded. She is hacking into things. She is building stuff. Onyii is also pretty good with technology, although not nearly as good as Ify. So I love seeing the technology part of it. I love seeing all the different futuristic weapons and the mechanical suits and like the augmentation that these girls, but also later as we get further into the book, there are more guys that they're interacting with, like how the augmentations work and the abilities that they can contribute. So it's not just replacing an arm, but it's making the arm stronger and giving it new abilities. Like the arm can be an arm, but it can also be a weapon. It can also be a gun. It can also be super strong. So I loved seeing that. There are people with like eye implants, like they lost their eye in the war and they get a new electronic eye and like it can see new things and like really take in more than a normal eye would be able to, and read different kind of like sensors. At one point Ify has I don't remember what she calls it, but it's like an implant that allows her to interface directly with technology, so she kind of becomes a computer and part of that. And I love seeing that technology. That's definitely a huge part of this. I love seeing the two girls and their struggle and how they're both thrown into very different situations when they deviate. Ify gets thrown into the Nigerian world and is sent to a school there where it's very technologically STEM-centered and trying to learn more technology, whereas Onyii falls back into the fighting. She needs to go get her sister and avenge her, and she gets more motivated by revenge. And so Onyii embraces the fighting more than Ify does. This is a book that is definitely, at least what I caught on was and cared more about was the characters than the actual plot and the actual battles and the actual direction of the war. It's also a book that had a lot of setup going into it, so it took about an hour and a half into the audiobook before I actually felt like I knew the characters enough to care about them. It's also about the time when the first battle happens and the camp is discovered, before I really got into this book and really felt like I liked it. This definitely looks at different relationships too that both of the girls end up developing. Ify, because she's so young, gets adopted by a new family in Nigeria and kind of has a second family. Onyii's relationship with the other girls that she's fighting with and the other members of the Biafran resistance movement and their army that they've set up. So I also really enjoyed their different relationships. So on the whole, I ended up giving this 4 stars on Goodreads, but it's probably more like a 3.5, 3.75. It's a solid read. I enjoyed it, but I'm not in love with it. It also kind of dragged on a bit. Like, it feels like it's 4 distinct books. There are 4 distinct eras. There's the before they get separated. There's this intermediary position where we find out what's happening during this 4-year break where Onyii and Ify are separated. Then there's like a couple other segments later on where the war really picks up and they really get involved with it. And it it kind of dragged on too much to really give it the 5 stars. And also there's just so much war, and just like war is bad and has massive consequences. It was kind of like beaten in too much to really enjoy it and give it 5 stars. And honestly, it's more like a 3.75 maybe, and just rounding it up. So if this sounds interesting to you, you should check out War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi. Let me know in the comments below if you have read this. Are there any other books that are similar? This one also reminded me a lot of A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea, which is his memoirs of his time as an actual child soldier during in Sierra Leone. And there is an afterward acknowledgement in the back where the author talks about several other influences and about how the actual Nigerian Civil War impacted him, and particularly his parents, in the 1960s. So that was a huge influence on him. So if you want more reading, but yeah, this was a lot. So peace out. I love you guys, and keep reading. Bye.